Hi. In the last episode, we talked about how do you transition from a UI designer to a UX designer. And the advice that I gave is that I would really get myself into doing UX interviews. And two of the biggest hurdles of doing UX interviews is how do you find out the purpose and what are you really trying to get out of it? And the second one is how do you recruit the right users? And this is not very easy. Well, once you get through these two parts, the next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come up with good questions. Obviously, to be a good interviewer, you got to have good questions. Well, I can't write the questions for you, but what I can do is give you some of the principles and some guidelines on how do you structure your questions in a way that are going to get the outcomes that you're looking for. So the very first principle I want to give you is balancing being objective with being insightful. You know, these two can actually conflict with one another. It's very easy in your pursuit of trying to be very objective to leave the interview feeling quite cold. The user may not feel very open, and it may just kind of not have much flow and it may not feel very human. And on the flip side of trying to be very insightful, of going deeper, of continuing to ask many whys, there's always the danger that we're going to put in some kind of color by the way that we ask questions or little comments that we make to help give more context of what we're looking for, not in the way of right or wrong, but in using words about preference or kind of leading questions, there's always the danger that we're going to kind of give sort of this kind of color or taint on what we're looking for out of that interview. And that can pressure the user or cause the user to answer the questions in a certain kind of with a certain kind of bias or a tilt. So the very first aspect of the interview is that introduction piece. My advice is to really put yourself into their shoes. They don't know why you're interviewing them. They don't know if they need to be experts. They don't know what is the purpose of this interview. They don't know you. They don't know the company you're with, the product that they're looking. They don't know anything. And of course, there's always a fear of the unknown. So the first thing that you want to do is give them all this context so that they feel comfortable. The second thing is they don't know that they can be open and honest about their feedback. So you want to tell them very deliberately that you would like to get their open and honest feedback. So I have a video and it's called 3 Goals for UX Interviews. And in that we talk about users, concepts, and usability. So I'm going to actually divide this video a little bit in the same way. I'm going to go ahead and give you advice on how to ask questions in these 3 different categories. And keep in mind that you're free to kind of have these combination interviews, and sometimes you may find a real reason why you're doing the usability portion of your interview to probe into something about the user while you're going through that interview. Okay. So on the user interview portion, what I would say is anything that would end up in your persona deck, in a persona profile, are questions that you want to be asking. So in personas, you'll often jot down things like their behaviors and their activities. You'll write down the goals that this user has, and those goals are a little bit targeted towards the kind of goals towards your particular product or your industry, or if you're a certain kind of application. They might be broader than your application, but not much broader. The next thing that you're going to want to put down are wants and needs, and then there's a variety of other details for whatever reason that you might also want to get into, such as what are their technology habits, their communication habits, certain kinds of aspects of their profile that would be relevant for your specific product. So with behaviors and activities, one of the things that I would really like to give my advice about is it's really good to start before the beginning of the experience of your product. So let's say you're working for an airline company and that company has an entertainment console, and that entertainment console is experienced during the flight. But when you ask the user interviews, you're going to want to ask activities on the events and things that took place before they actually even got on the flight. You're going to want to ask them about how they booked the flight, what motivated them to book the flight, what are some of the experiences that they're having while they're sort of going through the experience of maybe they don't even know they need to book a flight, but they're kind of looking and shopping and kind of going through this process of deciding whether they should fly in a certain time frame. What are their behaviors on, choosing music before they get on the plane, or do they just choose to go with what they got on the airplane? Okay, and there's a whole host of behaviors and activities that you might get into on the course of how do they behave themselves, what kind of activities do they do while they're on their flight, how do they get their entertainment needs met. You're going to want to find out about their goals and what makes you book the flight. What are some must-haves on choosing a certain kind of flight? There's the time frames, and maybe you want to isolate that question. Given that the time and the price and everything is locked in, what are some things that cause you to prefer a certain kind of flight? And before you get into the very specific questions on what are their preferences about the entertainment console, you want to build up this kind of context and understanding about some things that are deeper and surrounding the very application that you're working on. As far as wants and needs, these again can go a little bit broader, but not too broad. So what I do want to say about getting insight is you want to go deeper than your product, but there's a limit on how deep that you're going to go. Do you need to ask them about their religious affiliation? Do you need to ask them about, even whether they're married or not? Well, your application might be relevant to that topic, but you want to have this ability to go deeper, but not too deep. So the next kind of interview is doing a conceptual interview. And again, this conceptual interview might be the same interview with your user interview. So with your concept interviews, your questions are going to be focused on the desirability. What do they prefer? What do they like? And so you might show them a screen and it's a low fidelity wireframe. And your questions are going to be focused in on, what's first your impression? Is this something that you would recommend? Is this something that you would actually do? Where do you think you might go? Is there anything on this page that would make you want to click on it? Sometimes while you're going through this, they might ask questions of, is this kind of button or does this label mean this? And, I would really encourage you on the subjective side, the subjective principle, to ask them back, where do you think it would go? And you might also ask them, what would you want it to do? Because you're trying to get the concept and find out the desirability, this really kind of opens up that opportunity of turning this around and asking them, what would they want to do? Of course, this application could end up changing a lot. You can kind of open up this conversation and they'll kind of realize that this is open-ended and they're allowed to give really their real feedback and really tell them, in an ideal world, what would they ask out of this kind of product? Then you might dive into a deeper screen and this might get into certain kind of options and things that have prices and things that they might want to buy. Is there anything that you might want to click on? And you kind of watch them. And again, a lot of times they do ask you a question back. Is this kind of mean this? Does this mean that? Try to open this back up and ask them, what is your impression? Is this something that's interesting to you? You could ask it, is this something that you might recommend to a friend? And once they click on something and they give you some feedback and they tell you that this is something that they're interested in, then of course there's this opportunity to go deeper on what are their interests. Let's say, again, going back to this entertainment console and you're selling packages that are this unlimited kind of entertainment package that they can purchase. And if they have any kind of problems, you could ask them, is there anything that would cause this to be a product that you would purchase? Again, your goal is to find out the desirability. And the last kind of category of interviewing is the usability study. So my advice on this is when you're doing your questions is to really set up a scenario and a task that would cause them to do as much as they can on their own. In other words, in the usability interview, this is the most observational type of interview. You may have them click through 3 different pages and do all kinds of kind of searches and activities in trying to reach a certain kind of goal before you intervene that much. You can see a lot by their face expression as they're kind of clicking through. You can kind of gather a lot by seeing them hesitate or see that they get confused. With usability, you'd like to watch them get confused and see if they can kind of work their way back. In that usability interview, I'd like to try to let them run their course, but at a certain point, I might come back and ask them questions. So, in conclusion, I really want to emphasize the most important principle, or at least one of the most important principles, is to have this balance of being both objective and being very insightful, which means to really go deeper. Next one is you want the interviewee to feel very comfortable. The next one is you want to go deep, but you don't want to go too deep. You don't want to be asking about the meaning of human life in the interview. You want to stay focused in on what are things that are somewhat deeper to the person. In the entertainment console example, you might ask a question on what kind of music do they prefer, and then ask questions, is there certain kind of music that they prefer while they are in a flight versus while they're driving in their car? So these are the kind of principles and guides that I want to leave you off with when you're kind of designing your questions and you're trying to really come up with a plan for doing your interviewing. So go ahead and try to practice some of these principles and let me know how it goes. If you stuck it this far in this video, I want to thank you for that. The best way to support this channel is to leave a comment, to subscribe to the channel, or to just like this video. So I'll see you on the next episode.